September 2008. A woman walks into a New York City branch of the coffee chain Starbucks. Her name is Hanna, and like all other customers, her presence is recorded on the small number of CCTV cameras that are present in the store. Yet when asked her name so it can be written on the side of her cup, Hanna doesn't give her real name. But not out of any kind of duplicitousness. You see, Hanna doesn't realize who she is. In fact, the young woman seemed to have forgotten herself entirely. Hanna grew up in Oregon, the daughter of two Methodist ministers. As a result of their parents' profession, Hanna spent a great deal of her youth in a handful of predominantly Japanese American churches in her native state, where her parents both served as pastors. The family shared a deep connection with the Japanese migrant community, to the point where Hanna's mother, Barbara, spoke fluent Japanese after spending a few years teaching in Kyoto. Hanna had a mostly healthy and happy relationship with her parents, but obviously, both were rigid in their religious beliefs. This made it difficult for Hanna to communicate the fact that, as she grew older, she found herself more attracted to some of the other girls at school, rather than her male counterparts. This quite possibly motivated her to relocate to the much more liberal New York City after her graduation from the Pennsylvania Seven Sisters College in 2007. It was there that she funded the pursuit of her master's degree by working as a teacher, all the while volunteering for a charity that provided assistance to those suffering from HIV and AIDS. She was highly intelligent, outgoing, and by all accounts had a great sense of humor, so she was spoken highly of by all that had the good fortune to know her. At age 23, Hanna transferred to a middle school in Harlem named the Thurgood Marshall Academy. She was reportedly very excited at the posting and felt it gave her a chance to make a real difference among some of the city's most vulnerable youth. On the first day of classes in September of 2008, Hanna didn't show up to work, and it quickly became obvious that she had vanished. The disappearance of a beloved middle school teacher quickly became a high-profile case among local and national media outlets. Hanna's face was on almost every local news channel, all of which asked the public for any and all information related to her disappearance. These efforts were reinforced by scores of Hanna's friends and former classmates who canvassed New York City with thousands of leaflets and flyers in the hopes that it might generate some clues. From what law enforcement could gather, Hanna left her downtown apartment on a jog that she never returned from. Yet 10 days later, Hanna's Apple ID was used at an NYC Apple store. Police had employees pull up the relevant CCTV footage, feeling a great deal of relief that the tape showed Hanna to be alive and well. However, the employees had something rather disturbing to report. Although the woman in the footage was quite obviously Hanna, when approached by an old high school friend, Hanna apparently denied being herself altogether. Hey, Hanna, it's me. Are you alright? Everyone's looking for you." But instead of offering an explanation for her disappearance, Hanna apparently responded with, "Excuse me, my name isn't Hanna." The Apple Store employee later said that Hanna's response seemed frustrated, like it wasn't the first time that day where someone had approached her in such a way. The interaction seemed to have irritated Hanna so much that she walked away from the man and out of the store entirely. It was then that she made her way to the aforementioned branch of Starbucks and then onto a nearby gym, where it's assumed that she worked out and showered. Investigators were hot on Hanna's trail but couldn't quite seem to catch up with her. Despite the bizarre, forgetful episode, she seemed to be taking care of herself and wasn't acting in a self-destructive manner, which is why it was so confusing for investigators when members of the New York Harbor Police pulled her out of the Hudson in a severely dehydrated state, with absolutely no memory of the previous few weeks. She once again knew who she was, but offered no explanation for the events of the previous few weeks, nor her disappearance. After a few days' worth of recovery in a New York hospital, doctors declared that the most likely explanation for Hanna's bizarre episode was what was known as a dissociative fugue. In a dissociative fugue, people lose some or all memories of their past, and they usually disappear from their usual environments, leaving their family and job. The word fugue comes from the Latin words for flight and flee. The condition is sometimes given the playful nickname of Jason Bourne syndrome, in reference to the movies about a CIA agent suffering from a dissociative fugue who remembers nothing but his extensive training. Many of those who experience dissociative fugue states do so because they have suffered from a tremendous amount of trauma. But Hannah's mother later insisted that her fugue episodes don't appear to have any clear or obvious triggers, and when asked, Hannah could not recall any traumatizing events she had endured. The family even paid for an intense hypnotherapy session in which a trained hypnotist attempted to unearth any buried trauma or memories that may be affecting Hannah on a subconscious level. Yet after zero progress was made after numerous appointments, the hypnotherapist was baffled, and nothing in the way of trauma could be discovered. People have been known to not only travel across cities or countries, but also across continents, said Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Indiana University. The explanation behind the fugue is that the person is running away from a bad situation, from a bad marriage or a bad financial situation. According to numerous news outlets, one of Hannah's close friends made an attempt to discuss the 2008 fugue with Hannah, but said she often just sat in silence, almost like she was completely unable to talk about it. It felt like the words we have in the English language were not sufficient to describe this. This friend later added, and we can only imagine her frustration at her dear friend being unable to properly articulate what had happened. The following year, Hannah sat down with a reporter in a coffee shop and once again attempted to describe her terrifying ordeal in her own words, and this is what she said. It goes from, like, going to a run to, like, being in the ambulance. For me, that was like 10 minutes past, but in reality, it was more like 3 weeks. The hardest part is the period right after. You feel shame, and you feel embarrassed, or you feel guilt. All things that I've definitely felt. It's weird. How do you feel guilty for something you didn't even know you did? It's not your fault, but it's still somehow you. So it's definitely made me reconsider everything. Who was I before? Who was I then? Is that part of me? Who am I now? My roommates and I have a code word to show that I'm not going to fugue again, Hannah went on to say. My roommate had done this long interview with ABC, and the only thing they ended up printing was that I was a friendly vegetarian who likes to try new dishes. So if I don't get home one night, they'll text me like, friendly vegetarian, and I'll reply with, who likes to try new dishes, so we know we're on the same page. In early 2010, Hannah left her life in New York behind, moving to Philadelphia for a few months while she worked at a Quaker study retreat named Pendle Hill. It was here that she met a young man by the name of Patrick Rosal, and the pair had dated for a while before Hannah shared the story of her fugue episode with him. Being the good-natured soul that he was, Patrick didn't seem to be bothered by the revelation and considered it a freak accident. The way I see it, Patrick later said, Hannah gives so much to other people that at a certain point there is literally nothing left, and she departs from herself. Hannah spent a few years in Philly before again moving on, this time to Maryland in September of 2013. But it's here that she experienced yet another bout of dissociative fugue that lasted 2 days. She suddenly came to when she found herself sitting in a creek with a shopping cart beside her. But despite the confusing and terrifying experience, she noticed a kind of trend that linked her fugue episodes together. 1, they tended to happen at the start of the school year. 2, her pattern of behavior tended to focus around wandering whichever city she was living in. And 3, she always came out of her fugue when in contact with a body of water. With these in mind, Hannah quickly decided to move somewhere with plenty of water where she couldn't roam too far or into anything too dangerous. So in 2014, Hannah got herself a job as a teaching assistant in the U.S. Virgin Islands, moving to the island of St. Thomas where she embraced a new life and new friends. By all accounts, Hannah loved her new life on the island and found working with preschoolers to be extremely rewarding. Then, days after a Category 5 hurricane and days before yet another one, Hurricane Irma and Maria, friends noticed something was off. She seemed super out of it. They described her as being almost in a trance. On yet another beautiful September day, 32-year-old Hannah Emily Up disappeared again. On September 14th, 2017, she told her roommates she was headed over to the Montessori school to help them prepare for the incoming hurricanes. She got in their car and was never seen again. Despite desperate searches for local homeless shelters, beaches, hospitals, and even the morgue, Hannah was nowhere to be found. But given how she always seemed to turn up or reassociate whenever coming into contact with water, the cops figured it was only a matter of time before she showed up. In an attempt to intercept her before she endangered herself, police searched for Hannah around the island's marina, asking various ship captains and crew members if they'd seen an American girl exhibiting any unusual behavior. None had, but it was at one of these marinas, Sapphire Beach to be specific, that the cops found Hannah's abandoned car. Inside were a number of her personal items, such as passport and purse, which contained a few $100 in cash. Nearby was a small beach bar that served burgers and beer locals and tourists alike. It was there that Hannah's sarong, sundress, and sandals were found, neatly folded on a bar stool as if she planned to return to them to collect them after swimming. Terrified that Hannah has drowned, the Coast Guard sent 3 helicopters to search for her, while Hannah's friends checked the manifests of people evacuated from the island on mercy ships. But again, not a single trace of her was ever located, and the search for her unearthed far more questions than answers. The only logical explanation was that Hannah had gone to take a swim, gotten caught in a strong current, and then drowned. But if Hannah had drowned, her body would likely float to the surface within a few days. An emergency medical technician named Jacob Bradley circled the island in a rescue boat for hours on end in the days that followed, but again, no sign of the missing teacher was ever found. He even paid a visit to the St. Thomas morgue, as well as several others on the surrounding islands. All in all, he inspected 10 different drowning victims, and none were Hannah. The situation progressed to the point that Hannah's mother, Barbara Upp, moved out to St. Thomas to organize and aid in the search for her daughter. Her move came just after a devastating hurricane, and doubtless this hampered the effort to locate Hannah, either living or dead. It has never been an option to give up. Hope is persistent, and many people join me in that hope, Barbara later said. I've heard from many people here that it's very, very rare for people to drown while swimming, and then when they do, the bodies are found relatively quickly. This has been affirmed by local law enforcement who confess to being stumped by the mystery of Hannah's disappearance. But still, they're inclined to go with the most logical explanation, while Hannah's mother is on the record as saying, "I don't think she went out into the water. Everything that goes out comes back this way. She'd have washed up quickly." Hannah seems to be one of the rare missing person cases where even the most logical explanation has glaring holes in it. For all intents and purposes, Hannah waded in the Caribbean Sea that day, slipping beneath the waves, never to return. To avoid detection by the Coast Guard and EMTs in their search boats, Hannah's body would have to have been dragged along the seabed for miles on end, and even then, it would have floated back to land eventually thanks to the rather predictable currents of the Caribbean Sea. It would be folly to ascribe Hannah's disappearance to supernatural means, but it's difficult not to imagine the terrifying eldritch fates that might lead a troubled young woman to disappear once and for all, even after years of fighting to contain her psychological disorder. For years, the public had focused on the question of who took Hannah up. But in reality, a much more pertinent question might well be, what took Hannah up? 4 years ago in July of 1996, I had finished my term of service for the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day I was so anxious to go that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 23:45, I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited, and finally, at 02:45, he returned. I turned my key in, got the sign-off, and at 03:30, I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt that I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was nodding off. I decided just past Denton that I would pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came up to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air and throw something away and to get a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was a picnic stop and not a rest stop, so no restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a poster of a few missing persons, but I really didn't pay any attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows and turned on the boombox I had for some tunes and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked and didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. I then heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratched on the door key. I then sat up quickly, but I didn't see anyone there. I looked at all the windows and didn't see anyone, so again I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down and turned up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired I just laid back down. A few more minutes later, I heard the door handle again and car really shook. I sat up quickly and saw a man standing at the passenger's side looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up and I couldn't see his face. Being young and dumb and just out of the military, I yelled at him asking, "What the F do you want?" He just stared at me like an idiot and I got out of the car. Mind you, I'm only 5'6", but I was livid. He just walked off towards the picnic tables like nothing happened. All the while, I'm yelling at him that if he came back, I'd take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there. I got back in and went on my way. Even though I was so upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was super tired again. Luckily, about another 10 miles down I-35, there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but they don't. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a spot just in case I needed to leave quickly. Not sure why, but there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. I again locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later I hear a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, and no one was there. I got out of the car, which was very stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. But no one was around. I assumed it was my nerves from the other stop. I got back into my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes. This time I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I laid there with my eyes closed. I felt that someone was looking at me, and I opened my eyes and saw the guy standing there again with the red sweatshirt, hood up. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see he was smiling at me. I popped up quick and tried to quickly open the door and bump him. Being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he looked really skinny, but was about 6'2", maybe 6'3", but I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there staring at me, and I honestly believe it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat and started yelling at him to come get some. I'm not really sure why I said that. He started walking towards me and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking. As I got about 5 feet away from my car and he was now about 15 feet from me, a yellow van pulled up quick and parked just off to the side of the road. I finally realized what was happening and I saw 2 guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut it hard right and peeled my car out of there. I was so lucky. Being a manual car, I didn't stall the car because the other 2 guys were out of the van and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. In the restroom, I noticed that same flyer I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was basically a flyer with several missing persons on it and warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as possibly 6 foot, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I completely went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin wide awake. Not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But now I live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work, and I think about it quite often. In late June of 2014, a 28-year-old German man by the name of Lars Mittank took a vacation to the Bulgarian seaside resort of Golden Sands. Popular with tourists from all over Europe, Golden Sands is a major resort town on the northern Bulgarian Black Sea coast, adjacent to a national park of the same name in the municipality of Varna. Located just over 15 kilometers north of downtown Varna, it is virtually connected to the city by a continuous swath of resorts and villa communities. On the 6th of July, Lars and his group of friends found themselves in a disagreement with another group of young German men in a local bar. Lars and his companions were fans of the German football team Werder Bremen, while the opposing group were Bayern Munich supporters. There was a rather high-profile rivalry between the 2 football clubs, and the playful disagreement soon descended into a violent confrontation when one member of each group began pushing and shoving each other. The fight between the 2 of them quickly became a full-on bar brawl between the 2 groups. Chairs and bottles were thrown, pool cues were used as weapons, and in the fray, Mittank suffered a ruptured eardrum from a particularly vicious strike. Mittank was forced to visit the local doctor to have his head examined. It was discovered that the injury was a particularly nasty one that came with a rather high risk of internal infection. So the doctor prescribed a course of the antibiotic cefuroxime and advised Lars not to fly for the next couple of weeks, as it would risk seriously exacerbating the injury and cause a grievous amount of pain. It would also require another examination at the Bulgarian hospital in the coming weeks in order to ensure the wound was properly on the mend. So, Lars stayed in Bulgaria while his friends drove to the airport and flew back to Germany. He took a taxi back to the Hotel Color Varna, making reservations that would cover his recuperation period, then tried to spend the next few days relaxing and healing from his particularly nasty wound. But just a day after his friends left him behind in Bulgaria, Lars began to act very oddly indeed. His bizarre and erratic behavior was captured by the hotel's closed-circuit television security cameras. He ran around the hotel, looking over his shoulder, accusing staff and guests alike of plotting against him. A few of those encounters almost turned violent, and on more than one occasion, the hotel staff threatened to call the police. Finally, once Lars's behavior had become unbearable, the hotel staff asked him to gather his belongings and leave, as such violent outbursts were strictly against hotel policy and could no longer be tolerated. But before he checked out of the hotel, Lars made a call to his mother back in Germany. She later stated that he seemed extremely upset and told her in hushed tones that 4 German men, possibly the same his friend group fought with in the bar that day, were coming to kill him. He told her that he had made a significant withdrawal of cash to live off of and that she should cancel his credit cards. When she asked why, Lars told her that the men could use them to track his movements. Where he got such an idea is a mystery, but he seemed very, very insistent that this was the case. We know that on the 8th of July, Lars Mittank traveled to Varna Airport in an attempt to travel back home to Germany, against the doctor's wishes. He attempted to purchase a ticket on a flight back home, but after looking around the airport and apparently seeing something, became so flustered and frightened that he abandoned the attempt altogether. Lars then sought out a medical services area of the airport, although it is clear that he did not ask for any medical attention and would not tell those inside why he wished to remain there. They later confirmed that he seemed jumpy and paranoid, as if though he was hiding from someone that was hunting him. About 45 minutes after originally taking shelter in the medical services area, the airport's CCTV cameras capture some kind of construction worker making their way over to the medical area. This seems to have triggered Lars into rushing out of the airport, having abandoned his backpack and luggage altogether. More CCTV footage shows Lars running across a 2-lane highway. dodging speeding vehicles as he does so before reaching a large fence. Lars scaled the fence with frightening strength and speed, then sprints full pelt across a meadow before disappearing into a field of sunflowers with a set of deep woods beyond them. Police investigated the incident thoroughly but found no evidence that Lars was being followed by anyone. They even contacted the group Lars's friends had fought with, but they all had alibis that confirmed that they were nowhere near the airport on the day of Lars' disappearance. Many theories about what happened are all over the internet. Some theories believe that he was being used as a drug mule. Some believe that he suffered a psychotic episode. Only two things are completely certain regarding this behavior and unexplainable incident. The first is that Lars did not suffer from any form of mental illness. The second is that Lars was never seen again, anywhere, or by anyone.